First of all, thank you for the kind invitation to come here. It was really wonderful to kind of receive a mail from you, Alexander, and get invitation to come here and learning more about the wonderful things what's going on here at the University of Oslo. My previous engagements with the university have been a little bit with the museum previously, but as an information scientist, my colleagues are at the other university in the city. So I've been kind of I've many more kind of colleagues I know from there. But what I'm going to do here today is to talk about Paradata and kind of trying to give you some kind of an idea what it could be all about. I'm not here to kind of really to preach you kind of one right, correct understanding of what Paradata is, but more like giving a few options how you can think about it, and then also going a little bit into the practical side of it, kind of how you can think about it, how you can work with it maybe in practice. But it all really kind of depends on what you are working on, because it's, I don't think that it's very productive to think about Paradata as a kind of a one monolithic thing, really. All of this, what I'm talking about, it's drawing from research that we have been doing in the context of a project that's called Capturing Paradata for Documenting Data Creation and Use for the Research of the Future, or CAPTURE. That was running from 2019 until the end of last year. Although I'm very much kind of involved in doing stuff relating to that project still this year, and probably will continue doing it even next year. I'm not here alone. I have had a wonderful team with me, and many of my colleagues working with in the project in different time periods during the 5 or 6 years that we have been working on the topic. And the whole starting point with the project and with the idea of Paradata is the sort of a revelation that we have a lot of data. And even if we can say that the documenting kind of what the data is all about, so it can be very problematic. So even more problematic is that we tend to have very little contextual knowledge about how the data was created and how it was previously used. And this is not just kind of for, let's say, just kind of this kind of nice to know thing, but it's quite often a huge impediment to kind of actually using the data if we want to kind of preserve it somewhere. So in order to do something with the preserved data, so we don't only need to know about kind of what the data is or what the data is all about, but we would need to know how it was generated. And here the notion of Paradata, it's not my concept. It was introduced already in the 1990s in social survey research to describe all that stuff that kind of goes around a questionnaire survey study. How the questions were actually kind of spelled out, how long time it took for a study participant to fill in the survey, then in interview context, kind of where the interview was done, how long time it did, what the different things were kind of happening in and around the interview. That's normally not normally kind of documented as a part of the interview data set or in the interview metadata. But and then the Paradata concept was kind of sort of borrowed or reintroduced also in heritage visualization context for approximately 25 years ago, where the problem was that when new fancy digital 3D visualizations of different cultural things were done, so then you had kind of this kind of a 3D thing, and you didn't kind of really know how it was done and how it related to sort of kind of an original or some kind of an evidence that how the things might have been, so how it was kind of really constructed, what kinds of intellectual decisions were underpinning the doing of the visualization. But even if it's been used in different contexts, and now when I've been looking into Paradata, and we have been working on it, especially in relation to research data, so there's a sort of not really a consensus, but you can see that the different references to what Paradata is. So in very general sense, it's about kind of process-related data, and we have been especially focusing on kind of data that's relating to kind of the creation and in use and sort of manipulation, processing of data. So all this kind of information to know where the data is coming from, how it is being used, and so on. And there are obviously different kinds of ways of kind of thinking about what Paradata might be. And then in a very simple way, you can say that there are at least three different kind of categories. One of the possibilities is that we have a kind of a whole lot of different stuff in different contexts, and they are more or less kind of overlapping and related in different ways. Then the other option, that's kind of the really broad perspective. Then a narrow perspective would be that we kind of try to distinguish stuff as different entities. We have metadata, and that's a distinct thing. Paradata is a distinct thing. Then the data itself is a distinct thing within a context. Whereas then the approach that I'm kind of sort of myself liking most is that kind of there are different things. And there are maybe kind of things that qualify more as metadata for most of the people. There are things that are more kind of like Paradata for most of the people. Something that's kind of sort of mostly provenance data, things that are mostly data, but that they overlap. And one person's data can be other person's Paradata, and one person's Paradata can be another person's data. To exemplify, if we have a physicist who is doing research and documenting the research process, kind of how the experiments are being done. So that's definitely kind of Paradata for somebody who would like to use that physicist's data sets. But then at the same time, it's quite clearly data for somebody, a science researcher, a science studies researcher who would like to understand how physicists are working. So kind of these things really kind of go into each other. On a kind of sort of a theoretical note, in a book that's coming out fairly soon, I hope. We kind of sort of landed into an idea of Paradata that it could be a category of things that can be appropriated as informative of processes and practices. So it's not data anymore at all, but it's about things. And it's about different kinds of stuff that can somehow inform if we choose to use them to inform us about different types of practices and processes. Okay, now the presentation wants me to continue a little bit faster, but that's fine. The sort of idea behind this kind of a thinking is that kind of when we're working with data and we're making data sets, so the ideal image is that we produce a data set and then it can be kind of, we put it on the table, and then the next person can come in and take the data set and kind of start using it, as it would be a kind of sort of a monkey wrench, or I don't know, a cake. I bake a cake and you take the cake and then you eat it, and that's kind of, there is really kind of no problems with that. But when it comes to data sets, so it's kind of usually, even if we have some kind of an idea who might be hopefully using the data set that we're creating, so we're creating it and we're putting it on the table and then we're leaving it there. It doesn't have to be a table, it could be also a library or data archive or whatever. But then the other people are coming there and then they're kind of looking at it, that, okay, kind of what is this thing here? And it's not really kind of directly takeable. Okay, now we have to go back a little bit. But you kind of really have to do quite a lot of work in taking the data set and kind of sort of doing many things in order to, so that it can kind of really help you to do whatever you want to do. And there's a sort of if you're very close to each other epistemically, kind of you understand how the other person, how the maker of the data set has been thinking, so then it's much easier to take the data set and use it. If you are very kind of far away from that person epistemically, kind of you don't really know how he or she is thinking about how knowledge is coming into being. So then the epistemic distance is much longer, and then you need more and different kind of Paradata to understand how the data set was created. That could be a kind of course, different disciplines. If a sociologist tries to take a data set created by a physicist, so there's apparently quite a long epistemic distance. But it could also be a kind of question of time, question of at which university you were kind of educated. It could be a question about different perspectives to things. So the question is really kind of how you're thinking about things. So it has an impact on kind of what kind of Paradata is really useful. Then there is also another difference is that even if we kind of would think as a kind of creators of data and users of data, we would kind of sort of think about each other. The data maker is kind of really trying to, if we make a data set and we release it, deposit somewhere for somebody else to use, so we would kind of think that it's to be useful for somebody else. But in practice, it's often so that we might have some kind of a idea what that person would be, but we're mostly kind of really thinking about ourselves as the potential reuser. And then we're also kind of thinking how to document stuff when we are documenting, rather than what kind of documentation would be extremely useful at the point when somebody is trying to reuse it. So things that are easily documentable become documented, whereas users usually would like to have information that makes data sets reusable, would make them understandable, and so on. And there is, even if people would be using the same words, that okay, kind of yes, to understand the processes, to understand what kinds of tools were used, and so on. But kind of how the tools, how the processes get documented by the data makers, so it differs quite a lot from the idea of what the data user actually kind of thinks that would be useful in the end. As a whole, kind of what is Paradata is all about. So it's really, it's of course kind of that what we are trying to achieve with it. So it's some sort of transparency of the processes of how data, what has happened to data, and this has of course kind of many ethical, political, many other considerations, and Paradata might not be the thing to do with just about everything. You don't want maybe to disclose everything in all cases. It can be too private. It can be politically, it can be a question of security, it can be a question of life and death, and so on. But still, kind of thinking about if the idea is that we have data that we want make it kind of useful for somebody else and usable by somebody else, so then Paradata is supposedly kind of one way to contribute to that. Okay, what we have been kind of doing, kind of for real, to look into what Paradata is and how it works. We have been looking into very many different kinds of things. We have been looking into standards. We have been looking into, we have been working mostly on archaeology, because as a sort of a test case, where very different kinds of data has been used and is being created. A great diversity of different types of theories, different types of ways of thinking about how to look into things. From very kind of hardcore natural science, chemical, geochemical analysis to kind of extremely, let's say, kind of soft humanities. If you want to say that humanities are soft, I wouldn't probably say that, but still, to textual work, to looking into material objects and so on. So we have been looking at archaeological field reports, and that's an interesting piece of documentation in a sense, because it's really quite explicitly supposed to be reporting the results, kind of what was found, but then it's also supposed to be explaining how the things were done. Okay, when you look at the report, so kind of they sort of tell how things were done, but you really have to be an archaeologist and kind of been working with the specific kind of archaeological sites and in a specific region in order to really kind of understand how things probably were done in practice. We have been looking at instruction manuals about how they, in archaeological fieldwork, what they say about how the process should be documented. Briefly, they say that it should be documented, but they don't really tell that much about how. We have been looking into data sets, kind of what traces you can find in a data set of the process, how it was created. There's surprisingly a lot to kind of see there. We have been interviewing people creating and using data. We have been doing a survey, and we have been looking at information organization systems, how data gets documented in data management systems, and then we have also doing a little bit observation, much less than we thought from the outset, because of a kind of a small virus that happened to be making a mess out of our observational research for quite many years. All right, great, but then kind of this has been probably a little bit abstract. So the question is kind of what Paradata is for real. And the first thing and how Paradata has been discussed in a lot of research has been really a little bit kind of that there's the black box that needs to be opened somehow. And then as a sort of a standard answer, at least in the early writings, has been that, okay, kind of, yes, we can maybe kind of figure out some kind of a white box. And the solution is that if we have a metadata standard, so we put there one more field, that's called Paradata. And then there is a kind of you can write as much as you like, and the instruction is that kind of describe your process. And that's kind of sort of not quite helpful. Okay, what you're supposed to be writing? Something like this. This is not very much. This might not be quite easy to understand. And it definitely doesn't lead into that the Paradata would be sort of kind of, if we would like it to be uniform or we would like it to be kind of understandable by different people. So this might not be the way to do it in the first place. Where the Paradata then is, okay, you might have kind of got a little bit kind of an insight into what types of documents we have been looking into, but going a little bit deeper. So in the archaeological reports, we more or less kind of started from there, and you could actually kind of see a lot of traces of processes. There weren't kind of that many kind of descriptions right away, but there were still sort of places where you can find it. And this is something that you can quite easily sort of shift from archaeological field reports to different types of other research outputs. And you can maybe kind of find similar kinds of elements in research articles, in many other kinds of documentation that you do. Of course, there can be narratives about kind of describing how we did things. They are not kind of really that common, and they could be, the idea might be that they are more conveying trust on that, kind of believe us, that we did a good job, rather than that they would be actually kind of disclosing what was done in detail. Describing actors, who did what, can be helpful. If we know that it's an archaeologist or a musicologist or a psychologist who was doing the stuff, so we can get an idea how the things were done. One of my favorite examples is that if in Sweden, if you kind of were educated in medieval archaeology at Lund University in the 1970s in Sweden, so it's pretty clear how you think. So that kind of information can be very useful Paradata in the end. Information about methods, just kind of naming what kind of method was used, so it can be helpful. Okay, the caveat is that not kind of, if you mention that you are using a certain kind of methodology, it doesn't mean that the methodology was actually kind of followed to the point. Photos, videos of the actual work, how things were done, can be hugely informative. They are not always taken, but whenever there's a photo, kind of a researcher in work doing something, so kind of how the work was done, in what kind of an environment it was done, how the lab looks like. So it tells you a lot what kind of tools were used, what kind of people there were. Was it done together, alone, and so on and so on. In archaeology, it could be interesting to know whether it was dark, whether it was raining, because it has a direct impact on the quality of the observations. Citations, what kind of literature the people who were creating a dataset were reading, can be also interesting to know. Then you kind of know that where you got your, let's say, kind of influences. Then in the datasets themselves, we did a kind of a small study that's kind of sort of looking for continuation, looking into one archaeological excavation dataset, and we could identify different individuals doing things. We could identify sort of progression, both in time, that what was done first, what was done after that, but also in kind of thinking about first interpretation, preliminary interpretation and final interpretation, and so on. Also, sort of kind of what words were used in signaling of kind of what kind of, how people were thinking, what kind of vocabulary, what kind of sort of frame of reference they had. So there's quite a lot of things to be found there. Then, of course, kind of information about how knowledge is organized, and then how observations were turned into information. So you can see in a database or in kind of formal data set, you can see traces of that. Okay, what we then did find there, so we could identify certain categories of paradata. There's paradata that describes the scope of the data set, kind of where it's sort of what it's covering, what it's not covering. Provenance, sort of its curatorial and let's say kind of production history, its origin somehow. We could find methods paradata describing the methods, how the data was created, and then also kind of how the data was processed. Then there was knowledge organization and representation paradata. That's kind of how the knowledge is organized, what kind of vocabularies were used, what kind of fields in the database, and then also kind of how observations were turned into formal information. Then kind of sort of this is kind of a really formal research documentation, but then there has been kind of sort of some work done also on other types of paradata, and a little bit maybe kind of inspired by Ritmo and the work that you're doing. So I have a good colleague, Paul Riley, an archaeologist, previously also a management consultant with IBM. So he's been working a lot with artists and in archaeology. And he's been kind of sort of toying with the different other ideas of what paradata could be. There's a studio of his colleague, Ian Dawson, and his Ian Dawson is an artist, and his kind of atelier, and they sort of tried to create paradata of the creation of artwork by 3D scanning the atelier and the kind of the sort of the premises where he was working. And then they also did the 3D prints of the different phases of the object or artwork that he was creating. So you can kind of, and what they say is that they kind of created paradata, but then they also created peridata. That's kind of sort of the paradata about paradata. And then we come to the question that, okay, kind of we can create kind of paradata of the creation of the data, but then we have to create paradata of the creation of paradata and paradata of the creation of paradata, and so on. You get the point. And of course, you have to stop somewhere, but you have to also kind of deal with this kind of a problem. Another interesting work Paul has been doing was with another artist, and they were in archaeology when you are kind of excavating. So you're using tools, and the stereotypic tool is a trowel, and kind of you can sort of kind of see if you take a photo of archaeological kind of excavation, and when they have excavated something, so you can see in the soil how they have been using the trowel. So it's kind of sort of paradata explaining how the work was done. And it kind of really can tell you a little bit about what kinds of things there can be found, kind of what is really in the record and what's not. So it's really quite informative about the kind of the data creation process. What Paul did, so they, and Paul and Stefan did, so there's a, this is a kind of a sort of a map of the different moves of the trowel. Kind of drawn. So that's one way of documenting it. Then the other thing here, it's a soundscape, kind of how it sounded. Because for an archaeologist, it can be hugely important to kind of, you hear by kind of how the trowel sounds, so you hear what kind of soil it is. So that's also paradata. We did a kind of a small experiment, and we tried to kind of continue working with it, but it didn't kind of really lead into something because our potential colleague at that point, she was a little bit too busy. But there was an exhibition at Uppsala Art Museum at one point for a few years ago where they had made a performance of the curatorial work at the museum. And I thought that was kind of hugely inspiring in a sense, because that was kind of sort of paradata if you kind of sort of choreographed the curatorial work. So yeah, that's kind of the way of doing it. And then we went a little bit into kind of thinking about choreographies as a way of capturing practices and processes. And yeah, I think there is something to look into. We published one paper, but that's more all kind of like theory, but it could be done more in practice. But this is just to kind of showcase that it doesn't have to be just kind of sort of a descriptor and a piece of text, but it can be many different other things as well. Then kind of sort of trying to think about different categories. So here, many of these things, okay, choreography isn't really a trace, but what Paul and his colleagues were doing, so they were very much about kind of traces of different things. And they can be traces of kind of traveling, but they can be also traces of a little bit more kind of boring things. They can be traces of kind of if you have a table, so what kind of words were used to describe things? So you can see quite soon that, okay, kind of what kind of a frame of thinking people had. Then it can be also kind of, if you have a diagram, a map, so you can quite easily see that, yeah, this kind of a diagram, it comes from one specific software package that's quite often used in Swedish archaeology. So yeah, that's Paradata. They've been using that software. Okay, fine. Helps us quite a lot. Then also kind of looking at how measurements were done. Here are points. They haven't been measuring kind of sort of perimeters of something. So it also kind of tells us quite a lot how the data has been kind of generated. And then of course kind of, yeah, photos of traces, whatever, kind of things that have been kind of left out in whatever we are working on. Then another kind of category of how to think about Paradata could be that there are certain, then people also leaving ingredients for future knowledge making. And these could be descriptions. Okay, we did this and we described this thing, kind of how we created the data set. And that's sort of kind of, this is written for a certain purpose. And the purpose, okay, it can be of course kind of to disclose things. It can be to kind of create transparency. But it's mostly to kind of create some sort of transparency. People want to tell something. They don't necessarily, and even if I would kind of like to tell everything, so I'm not telling everything because I'm telling you a story that I think is kind of somehow relevant to tell you. So in that sense, I'm kind of planting you and giving you some sort of ingredients to kind of know more about the data-related process. And in archaeology, it could be these kind of narratives. Then to a certain extent, they can be also photos taken of the work that has been done. And this is kind of an example of the photo that tells quite a lot how the data creation happened in practice. This is another one. Especially in Swedish archaeological field reports, kind of a fairly fun detail is that there is almost always a hydraulic excavator. Okay, it's a kind of a fancy big machine, so yeah, kind of it gets documented. But then of course, kind of in a sense, knowing what kind of how big the excavator really is. So yeah, it's kind of sort of telling, okay, it's usually used only when you take away soil that's not thought to be that interesting. Then you continue by excavating by hand when you find something. But still, it kind of sort of tells something about the granularity of the data capture. Then heading towards the end, so there are kind of general things to consider. It's quite obvious that these different types of Paradata, so they kind of really overlap and complement each other. So kind of in a sense, kind of to get the most complete picture of everything. So it's really to kind of keep it all, and that's obviously kind of coming with certain problems. Then it's also kind of important to think about that the Paradata that you are either creating or you are keeping, or both. So it's doing different things. It of course kind of informs, it tells you a story, but then it also kind of sort of coordinates the work in a way that kind of when you decide that, okay, I'm going to document these certain things, so it's directly having an impact on how you actually kind of do the data making. But then it's also having a coordinating effect on the work of data reuse later on. And what Paradata there is, so it is having an impact on kind of how people think about the data and how they think that it should be used. All kinds of Paradata are obviously very contextual to different domains and different genres. To domains in a sense that kind of what an archaeologist needs to know and what would be and that the type of Paradata an archaeologist creates. So it's something that's kind of mostly and most directly speaking to other archaeologists. whereas when the epistemic distance gets longer, so then it gets more difficult. And then you get into this kind of a general discussion about the contextuality of information and knowledge. But then Paradata is also contextual to genres, so how you decide that you document. If you document it as a written narrative, or if you document it as a soundscape, so kind of different things get documented and different things get kind of sort of conveyed to whoever is looking into that documentation. Using Paradata, kind of the dream is that when you have enough Paradata and good enough Paradata, so then you don't need to be expert in the field, and it's kind of really, the interdisciplinary research is going to flourish because of wonderful Paradata. And yes, interdisciplinary research definitely needs more Paradata, because then you don't necessarily, if you are not working in your own field only, so then you need to know more about kind of what's coming outside of your comfort zone. But it's not only kind of that simple that you just kind of add more things and it gets better, but you still need to know about the context. So it's kind of, yes, more and better Paradata maybe, but then you also have to kind of sort of come closer to the data makers and try to learn about it in order to make it happen, so that the Paradata actually kind of informs you somehow. Then even the aim is that documentation in general, and Paradata, of course, as a part of documentation, so it should reduce the elusiveness of knowing in different ways, so that we would know more and we would know more specifically about processes and practices. But then it also contributes to that. So kind of if we tell certain things, so then we don't tell other things. And kind of this kind of a full disclosure, it's not really possible. It's not never going to happen. So kind of doing something, so you have to always kind of think about that. Then you are heading towards some sort of openness, some sort of transparency, and then you are kind of sort of choosing out. You are leaving out certain other things. And because kind of the big conundrum somehow is that kind of ideally you could document everything, and that would be the perfect situation. But in practice you can't do this, because you can document a practice or a process forever. There is no end to kind of how much and how many different things you can do. So the question is really kind of how to determine when document enough, but not too much, to make it kind of reasonable somehow. And this is really the big question. I can't answer that because it's really depending on each specific case, what you want to document, what kind of a thing is that you want to document, for whom you want to document it. But there is, in a way, because kind of much, as I have tried to show, so much of the Paradata is already out there somewhere. You just need to know where to look it. So you don't necessarily need to go into the business of data making that much, or Paradata making. And it's really kind of, this is no real graph or kind of statistic somehow, but kind of sort of illustrating the point. So more documentation you create, so you aren't necessarily kind of creating that much more, at least useful information. So kind of stop somewhere and stop where you kind of think that it's reasonable to stop. Then the question is, of course, kind of how to document useful information. I see this question coming, and this is obviously quite a tricky question, because needs and what Paradata types are useful. So it depends on who is about to do what. The difference between data makers, difference between data users, different between different fields, different questions, different things. But what you can kind of sort of do, there are different methods. We have been also looking into this. And kind of, okay, this is a bit complicated, but I'm not going into details that much. But kind of one good way of thinking about it is to kind of think about Paradata as something that goes through the whole process of working with data. You can see that there are prospective methods that to generate Paradata. That happens before something is being done. It could be plans. It can be methods descriptions about kind of what we are planning to do. Some kinds of frameworks. Developing a workflow before you actually do something. Writing an instruction manual, maybe. Then there's a lot to do kind of when something is being done, kind of at the time when data is being made. When an archaeologist excavates something, when you interview a person, when you collect data by motion capture, so you at the same time document certain things about how it was done. Then there are retrospective methods. Afterwards, you kind of sort of generate the data about what already happened. And I wouldn't say that one of these are kind of more important than the other, but if you do a little bit of each of them, so then I would say that you get a more kind of complete idea of what's out there. And especially because these all have also different perspectives. You have a different idea of what's going to happen beforehand. In the moment, you make certain observations, and afterwards you have a kind of a certain idea about what happened, and you might have forgotten something afterwards, but you have also thought about things, and you might have a kind of a clearer idea how it really kind of went in comparison to how it went at the time of when it was done. But really, it's not about having more documentation, it's about understanding data work. Then it's about kind of avoiding cleaning too much. Now every kind of librarian and data archivist is hating me because I'm kind of that leave the mess there and let somebody else but leave it there and let somebody else to take care of it. But I think it's really important. Kind of working documents, preliminary versions of data sets, so they should to a certain extent be kept. Because that's where much of the Paradata is. If it's kind of too clean, too nice, so then you don't really kind of know where it's coming from. Then finally, before kind of a short commercial, so there are some sort of quasi-practical advice. Good ideas might be if you kind of want to formalize and homogenize your Paradata, so you can. You can maybe do it a little bit for known needs, especially for making stuff findable. You can systematize the basic Paradata to a certain extent with the idea that if it's possible, so that there is kind of certain things need to be documented, but then you can kind of add more things if you need. It's quite useful to describe vocabularies in a sense. Kind of using what words that you are using, because it can help others really to follow you much more and your kind of thinking. What is not documented really that much at all is knowledge organization. How kind of the data gets into this kind of a nice tabular form, and then also kind of how you thought about your observations, why you are using certain words, why you are using certain types of ways of expressing things. So kind of do more of that. Then describing at least sometimes this silent knowledge about kind of how things are kind of generally done. This isn't something that we document because kind of everybody knows that. But in a few months, nobody knows that because nobody has been there. So kind of use a little bit of what is the kind of the usual way of doing things. And then when you have done it once, so you have the description and you can reuse it quite a lot. And then what you need to do is to describe anomalies, kind of what didn't follow the procedure. Questionable ideas, just kind of cleaning stuff so that it looks great. So that's a very bad idea. Just kind of leave it otherwise. Then I would say that it's also kind of from Paradata perspective a bad idea to systematize things kind of in a way that kind of you have to do this in a way because I have decided that you have to document it in this way, not because it's kind of useful to document things in a certain way. Then deciding beforehand what knowledge can be created, what information can be documented, it's also a bad idea because you don't really know what important and interesting stuff could be kind of coming up later on. Cleaning for the sake of cleaning, okay, that was sort of kind of covered. Forced templates. Templates are good, but if there's a situation when you absolutely need to do something else, so then you would probably need to do something else. Documenting too much is a really bad idea. Do your kind of something more interesting. Documentation is pretty boring in the end. And stop thinking that everything can be documented or should be documented, because that's a really bad idea. It doesn't really happen. And If you're interested in kind of reading more about this isn't really a commercial because both the books are open access, so you don't have to buy them. The one to the left, it's already out there. It's kind of giving a sort of an interdisciplinary perspective, a collection of articles from colleagues from in different fields writing about Paradata and how it fits and doesn't fit into their research contexts. And this other one, it's more like kind of what's coming out of the research project, and it should be out in July this year. They have said that from Cambridge. Let's see what's happening, but you can sort of kind of follow what's happening and what's not happening. And thank you. That was it.